In this video, I will be telling you about how I got A's in all 12 AP classes I took, and fives in 11 of the 12 AP classes, and a 4 in 1. And also, I will be describing a framework for a modified framework from what I did that hopefully will hopefully will be a more efficient way for you to learn and study AP material that will give you a lot more time to spend with, enjoying high school and with friends. First, I took the 12 AP classes I took was in 9th grade I took AP US Government and Politics, and then in 12th or 10th grade I took AP World History and AP Statistics, and then in 11th grade I took AP US History, AP Biology, AP Computer Science, and then AP Literature Composition, AP Language Composition, right? I think that's what they're called. And I took them both together because they were combined into one class, which was focused around US Literature, so it's called AP US Literature. But I took those two. And then my senior year, I took AP Physics, AP Calculus BC, and then AP Spanish Language and Composition. And that AP Spanish Language and Composition was the one class I got a 4 on, but I still got an A in the class. Firstly, I want to give some general recommendations for AP classes. First, you should get out of the mindset that the AP classes are impossible, because while some are really hard, they are all manageable as long as you optimize your studying and learning habits, and then understand that for each AP class you're probably going to have to learn how to adapt general habits around studying and learning to that class. And hopefully I'll give you in this video you should learn some general learning and studying habits that I've been researching, but also I've implemented more, not unconsciously, and that kind of fleshed out later towards my end of my senior year, that hopefully you'll be able to use and adapt to whatever AP class you're in. And the second piece of advice is to get out of the mindset that you have to use all of your free time for studying and just basically consume all, like the AP class should not consume all of your free time. And for some of you, maybe this is not a problem, maybe it's consuming too little, and that you're not, you need to devote more time to actually getting the grades you want. But for me, it was the opposite. For me, freshman year, I spent all of my free time all on one AP class, basically. Or towards the start of the year. I got better as the year went on, but towards for my first semester, I spent all my free time on AP US Government, which was insane because at my school it was a harder class. It was definitely way harder than the AP test. So all the tests, the AP test was the easiest AP test I ever took. Partly because I way overstudied, but also because the tests we took in class were 5 times harder. But I really overstudied, and it just consumed me, and it just made me dislike AP classes. But once you learn, how to study for them and how to learn, it makes them a lot more enjoyable, because you can learn all these new, interesting topics, but then they're still not consuming your life. So those are my general pieces of advice. Now on to my advice for AP classes. So this is not talking about the AP test or the AP exam at the end of the year, but just your AP class in general. So basically all preparing for all your different tests, maybe your midterms or your finals for semester 1, or if you have a different schedule. But this is the class, not the exam. So how this part is gonna break down is basically I'm just gonna explain starting from the night before class all the way to your test, and then you can apply this for each unit or whatever, however you break down from test to test, basically. So the night before, what I would recommend, and this is not, I didn't do this, but this would have saved me a lot of time, especially in my calculus class, my physics class, which were a lot harder to grasp for me. And even I did this a little bit in my biology class, actually, because I had this was during lockdown and I had some extra time, and I just decided to do this. But this would save me a lot of time. Is a technique called priming, which is basically just making yourself familiar with the material before class. So the idea is to watch a YouTube video about the content, if you have class slides, look through the class slides for that day. If you or if you don't have class slides, or you don't really know exactly, then look through, or whatever. If you can't find a good YouTube video, then you can look through the textbook. And I didn't really read the textbook for a lot of my classes, but you don't even have to read it like in depth. Just skim the textbook. Like this could literally take the form of, if you want to do the textbook route, which probably would be the best ish, then it could take the form of you literally just looking at the title of the chapter or whatever title of the section, and then looking at the keywords for whatever you're going to be covering that day. And if you don't know exactly what you're covering, you can either ask your teacher or just approximate, just looking at the keywords for whatever the couple sections, and then just, searching up the keywords so you understand them. Because the whole goal of priming is just to give yourself like a skeletal framework of the topic. So, you have your main concept, and then this is gonna be your main concept, and you just want to understand like the outline of the framework of it, so that when you get to class, it feels more like a review session, not that you're just like, hit with, all this content. Because the goal is to not feel like, oh my gosh, I don't understand anything I just learned, right? That's how I felt in some of my AP classes. And, especially when I went to college, I wanted to prevent that, because it's just a waste of time. Then I have to relearn all that material on my own. So if you prime and basically learn, you can spend a minimum of 5 minutes. If you don't have, a ton of time to spend 5 minutes skimming it, get to like 20% understanding of it, maybe 10%, 20%, and trust me, it will still make class easier. If you want to really go into it, you can implement a method called SQRR, I think. Yeah, there's 3 R's, which is skim. So you skim the chapter, look at the keywords, maybe jot them down if you want to, and then you go into questions. So you ask yourself questions about what do you think the chapter is gonna, what questions do you think will arise in this chapter, and then you read. So you read the chapter, and then as you're reading, you're gonna be recalling. So you're gonna read a portion, and you're gonna call it. So basically, you're taught. Speak back to yourself or teach it back to yourself in your own words, or just say to yourself what you learned. And then the last R is revise. So then you're going to revise, which I just think of as, you're going to create some type of like outline. So, or you can create a note, right? But you're going to try not to do this while you're reading. You're going to try to do this at the end. That's what I recommend. Or, after a long, like, you're not going to do this like every single like interesting thing you find, you're not going to put down. And because that's the point of revising. It's like to be like, halfway through or at the end. So it makes you really like recall, and like, it takes more effort. So we're just going to make it stick better. And so you can just take regular notes, or I recommend doing a mind map. If you don't know what a mind map is, I recommend searching up Justin Sung, or looking at his YouTube channel and looking at his videos on mind maps. He has really good videos on them, and also on a lot of other study and learning techniques. But that's going to be priming. That's going to be before lecture. Then during the class, within your class, I said lecture, and I was priming, but it's just because I'm preparing for college and all the called lectures and stuff. But during class, you should be asking your teacher questions, or just asking yourself rhetorical questions, right? Writing them down, because this is going to be important for trying to review later. And also I recommend doing handwritten notes. You could also I talked about mind maps. You could do a mind map. That's a type of note that I'm trying to implement now while I'm in class. Or you can just do regular notes. Either way, as long as you're writing stuff down, but also don't try to write everything down. Try to so now that you've primed, you should be understanding the basics of it. So you should be able to more just, take in the information, not just feel like you have to write everything down. Because if you just write everything down, then it's just going to become, you're like a stenographer. That's also why I think handwritten notes are better, is because it's a lot hard. You can't really become a stenographer. If you're typing, it's a lot easier to. So what we're trying to get out of it is just get as much of it like a understanding of how everything flows together, like how all the ideas are connected, and the priority, like what's most important, than how the hierarchy of importance of the concepts. Because it's a lot harder to build the trunk up of a tree when you have a bunch of leaves. Like, you have a bunch of leaves sitting on the ground, which leaves are just concepts. So if you write everything down, you have a bunch of leaves, right? You have all these different concepts everywhere, but you don't have anything to connect them with. Whereas if you spend the time during, your priming in your class, if you spend the time building the roots in the trunk of this tree and then building it up into branches, then you can spend after class, and while you're doing homework, adding on the leaves, right? Adding on the little concepts that you might have missed because maybe you weren't writing everything down. So unless you feel that the teacher is saying something that you could not find anywhere else, or that's so important, then you might break your flow to write it down. But otherwise, you want to try to not write it try to want to take it in as much as you can, and then when you feel uncomfortable, not writing anything down, then wait a little bit longer and then write it down. So it's just trying to get yourself to build up that tree before you add on the leaves. And so this will make studying a lot easier and reviewing, because then you would have solidified your framework of how the ideas, everything fits together. And also it makes it a lot easier for things where there's a lot of content, and so you have to, it's a lot harder to just remember a bunch of facts, but if you remember how they're connected and how they go together and how they form like a sort of logical framework, it makes it a lot easier, a lot easier to understand. Then the night after, you go to school. So you go to school during the day, you're implementing the stuff I talked about in the previous part, and then you're going to come back home, and that night you want to do some form of review. And this doesn't have to be, you're not reviewing, so intensely, but you're just doing some form of it's called active recall. So this is either, so you're not rereading. Rereading is not a good technique to actually learn something and to get mastery in a subject, because it gives you a sort of Dunning-Kruger effect, which is basically you feel like you understand something when you actually don't. So that's what you feel. You feel smart when you reread something, but really you don't understand it as much as if you use some form of active recall, which is trying to teach the subject back to yourself. So if it's more of if it's like a history class, trying to recall all the different events that happened. Or you could do practice problems. So for like my physics class, or mathy or science class, this might be practice problems. Like for my biology class, we got certain sections of this giant pack of problems. So that might be, for me, that might be going through all those problems and then thinking about how and then working through those. And so it just depends. Or for some classes, maybe for biology classes, or maybe chemistry, probably more biology, and then like history classes and stuff where there's a lot of just facts. You could also use flashcards, and I recommend for flashcards an app called Anki. So if you've watched any study videos, you've probably heard people talk about Anki. It's like Anki or RevNote. RevNote is kind of a little bit more it's a little bit easier to learn, and it's a little bit newer. Actually, it's a lot newer. But either way, you could use Quizlet. I use Quizlet a lot, but it doesn't have a spaced repetition software, it's a spaced repetition software is a software that spaces out. Basically just spaces out your repetitions of the flashcards. So you learn a flashcard and you rank how well you knew it. So if you knew it right away, then maybe then you click one button, and then it will space out. So maybe you won't see it till a week later because you knew it well. If you didn't know it, then it might show you an hour later or a day later, right? So it uses spaced repetition, which is another very important concept in learning how to study. That will so it will make it so that you hopefully learn and master things a lot quicker. So that's what you should be doing the night after. And the whole point of this is just to solidify the knowledge that you learned while priming and during class, and also maybe add on some of those leaves or some of those details that you might have missed. Then the next section is after, so after the night before, and then the day of learning it, and then that night, you should have some way of spacing out your repetitions of material. And this is honestly the most important part of this whole framework for how to learn in AP classes. And I know I'm talking about a lot of different techniques and a lot of different things. It seems overwhelming maybe, but you don't have to implement all these, but I would just recommend implementing some of them or in some way, especially for spaced repetition, because this is something that if I didn't implement any of the other things, if I just implemented spaced repetition, it would save me a lot of time. spatial repetition and active recall actually, because but spatial repetition like number 1 and active recall number 2, because I find that in almost all my classes, like, if I'm preparing for a final and I have to review all the material that I learned that semester, or if I'm preparing for the AP exam, then it's like, oh my gosh, I forgot like half the material. And it's because I'm not spacing out my repetition. And the only class I didn't feel as like, overwhelmed about was my physics class. And it was because like spatial repetition was kind of inbuilt in to the course, because we're constantly reviewing topics that we had, so we would learn. So we started with one-dimensional kinematics and two-dimensional kinematics, which is just like, you shoot something out of a cannon and stuff like that, and you have to find the velocity and stuff like that. But then we would use that, and then we would also learn that with energy, but then we have to still use kinematics. So it's like, it's spaced out the repetition, and that's a class that I felt like, I got to the final and I was like, I don't really have to review that much, because I still already know a lot of this. So that's the whole point of spaced repetition, is to get rid of that, feeling of like I don't remember like 70% or 50% of the stuff I've learned this semester, this year. So that's the point of this, and it basically takes a form of so you can search up. What I use is, or I've been using is basically a prospective revision timetable. You can use a prospective or retrospective. You don't know what that means. It's basically just mean prospective is or what a revision timetable is basically is you take a subject and you say, I learned concept, or I learned this unit, or I learned this section, whatever. I learned this section today. I have a okay understanding of it, so I'm going to, in 3 days, I'm going to review it. And the review could take 5 minutes, it could take 10 minutes, it could, if you want to spend probably spend no more than maybe 45 minutes. That would be a lot though. If maybe it's a weekend and you have some time and you really need to hone this down, or you really want to hone this down because it'll probably save you a lot of time later, then spend maybe 45 minutes, an hour. But it just depends, or but that's the whole point. So if you really understand something, then you maybe space it out a week, 2 weeks, or whenever you're gonna review a couple days before the test. Or if you understand it, then you maybe space it out a week or 5 days. And if you kind of understand it, you get some things but not really, then maybe space it out 3 days. And if you don't understand it, then maybe space it out 1 day. Review it the next day. So but then once you review it in that next session, then you are going to then recess there. So so you learn it that night, then you say, I know it kind of well, so I'm going to space it out 3 days. So I'm going to write in, maybe it's a journal, or maybe it's you can search up revision timetable on Notion. Notion is a note-taking app. That's what I use. And you can find a lot of videos on revision timetables. But basically just have some way to write down 3 days I want to review concept, or I want to review section A. And maybe, so I'll get to that in a second, but I want to review section A. And then in 3 days, you say, I'm reviewing section A. Boom, I review section A. I feel good about it now. So I'm going to space out 5 days. So in 5 days, I'm going to review section A. And then boom, you review in 5 days and you say, okay, I feel really good about this. I'm gonna wait until, a couple days before the test when I review kind of the whole unit. And then boom, you're going to wait till the days. And then you start reviewing. So just the point is it's spacing out. And so it maximizes on effect, or on it's called a forgetting curve, which basically means that you forget things at an exponential rate. So the whole point of spaced repetition is it catches the forgetting curve starts, it catches the forgetting curve at, so instead of, you forget it like this, and your knowledge goes right down to here, as it's going down, it catches it and you review it, and then it goes up to here, and then it catches it and reviews it. It goes up to here, and then it gets flatter. This line gets flatter the more times you review it. So that's the whole point, is that it gets it to a place where you understand everything. And you don't, so then when you're reviewing, even for your test, your unit test, it's a lot easier. And also when you're reviewing for your finals and for your AP exam, it makes everything a lot easier, because you're not like starting from like 30%. You're starting from like 80%, 90%. So that's the whole point of that. And what I was talking about, or what I was gonna mention now, is that for AP tests, it depends on how, or AP classes, depends on how fast you're going, but maybe it might not be, every day it might be, you take a couple days of learning and you say that's the section, and then I'm going to review that, in 3 days. But it might not be, every day, because sometimes you're not reviewing enough every day to give it its a whole, like section. Maybe you're just reviewing part of it, and then, or maybe you're learning part of it, and then you're learning the rest of it tomorrow, or you're gonna learn, some today, some tomorrow, and then the day after, and then that's gonna be a section. So it just depends on how fast you're going and how much you're reviewing, onto what is gonna be a section that you're gonna use in your spaced repetition. Then a couple days before your AP test, or your test in that AP class, you're going to just spend a lot of time testing yourself on different information. So I forgot to mention this in the spaced repetition part, but your spaced repetition review sessions are just going to be like, you're reviewing if you made a mind map, or if you just review your notes. So like, you say, this section I learned this, and then you try to recall it. You don't reread the notes, you just recall it. So you speak back to yourself. You can use a technique called the Feynman technique, which basically means you're explaining what you learned at like to a children or to a child. Because if you have to explain to a child, then you should be able to fully grasp it, because you can condense and dilute all the advanced mumbo jumbo into simple ideas. And this also means using analogies. Like I use an analogy of comparing learning a subject to a tree and branches and leaves, right? So if you are able to create analogies and create stories around a subject, then it should help deepen and more solidify that knowledge into your mind, right? Because then you have like pictures, or you have images that you can use, which are a lot easier. Images are a lot easier to remember than actual words. So if you can link it to an image, right? That's what I also recommend in your notes, drawing images of things. So even if you're not using, the mind maps also emphasize a lot of using images and not using words. But if you're not using a mind map or just using regular notes, just try drawing images next to things, because that will help link it in your mind. So that's spaced repetition. Or could be doing practice. The spaced repetition review session could be doing practice problems, or going through the flashcards for that session. But then a couple days before the test, you should again be doing. I recommend making a whole outline of the whole unit. So it could be doing a giant mind map. I know I say mind map a lot, but I really like them. I think it's very intuitive for me, because I have a very good, my mind naturally forms structures around, concepts, and it just likes to lay things out. And then also it helps you find the rules and commonalities commonalities among like different concepts or, problems. And then, so basically, yeah, so you can create just create some type of giant outline of the note, maybe on one day, or the unit on one day, and then maybe you could look through homework problems, and look through the homework and review problems that maybe you really struggled on. And then what I did and I found it really helpful is for my physics class, I literally just did all the homework problems again, but that takes a lot of time. And so just maybe review the hardest ones, and maybe just glance at some of the other ones if you want to just kind of really quickly. And then I would also so that may be one day, and then the second day is homework problems, or one day is like outlined, then one day is homework problems, then the next is taking a practice test. So taking a practice test, and then while you're doing like review of like problems, of like specific problems, especially for math and science classes, you should use a technique called interleaving, which basically just means you're not doing if you're doing right, you're not doing so for physics we have like energy. So say I was doing energy problems, so I'm not doing just energy problems, and then I'm going to switch to maybe motion problems, or kinematics problems, and then I'm going to switch to momentum problems, right? So it's not like I'm going to interleave them. So I'm going to do a couple energy problems, then I'm going to do a couple momentum problems, or I'm going to mix them all together, and then just do, I don't know what's going to come up, because by doing that, it helps you discriminate, learn how to discriminate, and figure out the differences. So on a test, because on the test there's usually not going to be a section for energy, section for momentum, and section for kinematics, or section, right? They're all going to be mixed together. So it helps you discriminate and find what you need to use. It also helps you find the best techniques for each type of question. But then, yeah, so that would be the third day. So maybe take 3 days, or you want to space out into 4 days or 5 days, whatever you want to do. I just did 3 days for a lot of my tests, and I found that works fine. So that's going to be the reviewing for regular AP tests. Now on to my AP exam advice. This is basically just going to be an extension of the AP class advice. For example, my first piece of advice and my main piece of advice for this section is to have space repetition sessions of your units. So once you're done with the unit, you took the unit test, then you're going to condense all the sections that you're hopefully using or for space repetition sessions into just that unit. So now that unit is going to be something that you're going to review. So maybe you start out and say, depending on how well you knew that unit, maybe you say, I'm going to review it in a week, 2 weeks, whatever. And then at that time, then you say, you keep on reviewing, or maybe I'm going to review it again in 2 weeks, right? So it's just the idea is that you take, these units now, so then now you're going to review them, and hopefully then they're going to stay in your mind, and, all the connections and understanding that you work to build during that time, it's going to stay with you, and it's not going to be lost. Because if it gets lost, then it's going to make, reviewing for your AP exams a lot harder. So then that takes me into exam time. So exam time is, once, maybe March or April, it's kind of when you get into exam time or exam season, AP exam season. Because obviously they're all in May, but, you're going to probably start around April. And I recommend, I started starting for a lot of them. Maybe you can, if you want to do a month in advance, that's a lot, maybe 3 weeks, 2 weeks. Because by now, if you've followed at least the spaced repetition, if you just followed the spaced repetition, that's the biggest thing. If you follow that, then you should understand. At least you don't have to follow to a T, but if you follow it at least generally, and you've been reviewing, your sections and your units while you're doing your units, and then you've been reviewing your units every once in a while at least, then you should have a good understanding. You should, remember things enough that your review is, it's not going to take that long for you, because there's not a lot of stuff that you're adding. You're going to be adding a lot of the small details and stuff like that. But a lot of the general frameworking, it should be easy, even adding the small details, because you should have been building up that trunk and that root. And those branches should be a lot easier to build, or it should be a lot easier just to add on those leaves, right, to each unit. And so hopefully, you can take 2-3 weeks, maybe a month at most, and just spend a little bit of time. Or if you want to spend 2 weeks, 1 week, if you've done this correctly, you probably should be able to take, that should be fine. And for AP exams, I would not recommend, if you have, so a lot of my classes, especially after COVID, they had all their, notes, or, they had, online sessions, or they recorded their classes, and for one of my classes I watched all those, and I realized that was such a waste of time, when I should have just been trying to just do practice tests, or I should have written out what I knew about a unit, and then so if you want to do that, instead of doing because that's basically that's akin to rereading, which is not good. If you look at any studies on studying, that is one of the worst strategies, is rereading. And basically watching lectures again or watching classes is almost the same thing as rereading. So what I recommend instead is, you take a unit, or you take a section of a unit, or you look at a unit, take all the sections. You can either take the unit as a whole, or look at the sections and do this individually. But write out all that you know. So maybe you make a mind map, or you just do an outline of that section and write out everything you know. And then you look at maybe some notes, or you look at something. And then, try to or find the gaps in your knowledge. So you say, I know this, but then I can't remember what happened after this, and then I can't remember that, and then, so then you're going to write down what you don't know as well, and then you're going to go back and you're going to look and try to find it. So maybe you're looking then at the videos, but then you have a direction. You're not just watching them, you're not looking at just rereading the textbook, whatever, just hoping that you find something, or just for general, just because. You're looking for specific things, and that helps direct it and helps make your studying more efficient. So that's what I recommend for doing general review. Probably do that first. So just so that you're not just, you take a practice test, but it's oh, that's dumb stuff, I should just already know that. So hopefully you do the general review first, and then do practice test. So find some AP exams, past AP exams, or maybe your teacher has some like practice tests, or you get a book. You don't really need to. I got books like my first year, like you get Princeton Review, or there's like the Barons, that's what they call. You can get those. You don't really need to. Just look up past AP exams and probably can find some stuff. Or ask your teacher. There's actually teachers get, I think, copies of tests that they can give out to students to practice. You might have to do it in class, but that might be worthwhile as well. But then yeah, just doing practice tests, and then while you're doing practice tests, you should be, once you get problems wrong, or if you get problems wrong, I guess you probably will. Everybody gets problems wrong. Then analyze why you got it wrong. If it's a silly mistake, try to fix your testing strategies. If it was an error in knowledge, or a gap in knowledge, then dive in and explore that and try to flesh it out and add it to your framework of knowledge of that topic. So that should all lead you then to the AP exam, and hopefully then that you feel good, feel less stressed. The night before AP exams, I talked about this in my ACT, or if you haven't, I've been recording that. I recorded my ACT video already. I don't know if it's been published yet, but the same applies for AP exams as ACT exams or any big standards exam is. The night before, you should just be getting a lot of sleep. Get as much sleep as you can. Sleep, and also set all your materials out that you're gonna need to bring to the exam. And so if you need pencils, you need calculators. If you don't, or you need whatever, you get a snack during the exam, whatever it is, set it all out before. And then it will just relieves a lot of stress the morning, because you're not panicking. You just know everything's there. You have it in a bag, and you just grab the bag and leave. And then also I recommend in the morning eating something, so eating some type of breakfast, or if you want to drink coffee, drink some coffee, but then also eat something, because it helps you don't feel hungry, and that's the worst feeling during an exam is hunger, because then it distracts you. So then you get to the exam, and hopefully you feel good. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you found all my advice helpful. I just wanted to add a quick thing to the advice for AP exams, is that while you're practicing for AP exams, you also should be practicing timing a lot. So while you're taking all your practice AP exam, you should be timing them like you would be on the test. And so if you finish, and then if you go over time, then you should practice ways of how you're going to get around that, because you should be trying to finish all the exams, right? It shouldn't be like, oh, I got 70% done, that's pretty good. No, try to finish. So there's techniques, you can break down the exam into different sections, and then practice timing each section. So it just depends, but for each AP exam it's all different, but just make sure you're practicing your timing as well. But that's basically it. I just wanted to add that to my advice. And if you want to go deeper into learning and studying techniques, if you liked the techniques I talked about, interleaving, active recall, spatial partition, and priming, then you should search up videos by Ali Abdaal, Mike and Maddie, and Justin Sung. They're all kind of like medical school YouTubers. I mean, they're all doctors now, but they have a lot of videos on this, especially Justin Sung. I recommend if you want to dive deeper into this. But also, you can just watch, or if you want to just get an overview of, basically you can just listen to or read the book Make It Stick. I watched a lot of their videos and then read the book, but I could have just read the book, or I actually listened to the audiobook and took notes on it. But if you want to just read the book and listen to it, that basically covers a lot of it. It's like, the audiobook is like 6 hours long, 7 hours long. And if you put on like 1.5, 2 times speed, it's not that bad. But even if you don't want to do that, you can go down, and I have a link in the description to my website where I put all the in-depth notes I took on the book, on all the key insights that kind of link back to this, and I kind of applied them to studying and being a student. So if you want to just look at that too, that might be helpful. But besides that, hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, and thank you.